Pixel Therapy is a member of the But Why Though podcast network.
Go to butwhythoughpodcast.com for an inclusive geek community offering pop culture news, reviews, and podcasts.
I definitely think there are content creators and streamers on Twitch whose main goal is focused in the gaming realm, and more power to you. But for me, it's more like the people in chat. I would die in a boss battle or, get distracted from cutscenes 10 times over to have a good conversation with the people who are choosing to give me their time and energy on a day and hang out with us. Even if that makes me like, quote unquote, like a bad gamer officially, so to speak. Then
no such thing.
So be it.
Welcome to Pixel Therapy, the video game podcast where we look at the games we play through the lens of the player, where what you play is just as important as how you play it, and where emotional intelligence is a critical stat. Every other week, we bring on a guest who may or may not consider themselves a gamer to discuss the games that have made them and changed them, and all the feelings they have about our favorite pastime. I'm your co-host, Jamie, pronouns she, her.
And I'm your co-host, Spencer, pronouns they, them.
And this is Pixel Therapy. Let's get started, as we usually do, with our Patreon shoutouts. This is our special thank you to everyone who subscribed at our Patreon name in the credits tier for the month of February. Today, we'd like to say a big ol' thank you to Val, Genevieve, Lindsay, Grace, Jackie, Ben, and Pimhatai. Remember, if you, lovely listener, want to get your name in the credits, you can hop on over to patreon.com/pixeltherapypod, where you can subscribe for as little as $2 a month and get access to a monthly bonus episode of the show. It's just Spencer and I chatting it up for your listening pleasure. In March, our bonus episode focused on nothing other than Horizon Forbidden West.
What else is there?
What else is there to talk about right now? But we dove deep on beginner combat tips and tricks.
Jamie led a very informative clinic, gameplay clinic. It was very helpful to me.
My TED Talk. So anyway, if you're interested in checking that out, you can come on over to patreon.com/pixeltherapypod. Kick in that $2 a month and get access to a whole library of bonus episodes, but that one being the most recent one. And if you're a fan of what we do here on Pixel Therapy, please consider sharing us with your friends and family, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, or you can even write into the show by sending us an email at pixeltherapypod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from each and every one of you if you would like to reach out to us.
Unless you're an SEO consultant, because we get plenty of those in the inbox.
A lot of those, yeah. A lot of SEO consultants. We should start reading those on the podcast. Maybe that's what they're hoping for. All right, folks, it's time to get cozy. Pull up an armchair. Feel free to lie down on the couch. And let's talk about our feelings. Spencer, how are you?
Jamie, I'm coming at us all live from the road of life.
It's a traveling podcast now.
That's right. For the magic of the virtual studio, I can podcast from anywhere. And so I am podcasting from scenic Chadsford, Pennsylvania, the home of very hilly and windy foresty roads and pretty much strip malls as far as the eye can see.
Oh, very nice.
I've learned something on this trip. It's not really a pleasure trip. It's kind of like a business, although it's personal business.
A personal business trip.
A personal unpaid business trip. And I've learned something.
Yeah.
So I'm staying in this little inn, basically. And one of my comforts that I've become quite accustomed to at home over the past year and a half is an invention, perhaps most colloquially known as the Squatty Potty. Or
what
that is for folks who aren't familiar.
Yeah, please paint us a visual picture.
So here in America, we do this thing where we sit on a toilet, like
a throne, you might call it.
A throne, yeah, the porcelain throne, some might say. And it's basically like you sit in it like a chair to go to the bathroom. And I know that I've known for a long time that this is not the optimal way to poop. just because like when I would visit family in the Philippines, it's very common, like it's more squatting to poop in some scenarios. And anyway, it's just like, it's so much easier to poop. Like when I go camping, I'll do a squat poop, and it's just like, everything it's just better. It's better, easier on the colon. And this is like a thing. Like when I've sat, when I was reading about the Squatty Potty, because when it came out a few years ago, it was like all the rage. You go to someone's house and they have this little stool in front of their toilet, and you put your feet on it when you're sitting, and it puts you in kind of like the optimal squat position for poop to just uninterruptedly flow out of your body. And when we sit with our legs in like a 90-degree angle, we kind of like block up our colon and make it not as easy for the poopy to come out. So I lived a large part of my life doing that. And I started using the Squatty Potty. It changed my life, loved it. But now that I'm traveling, my hotel room doesn't have a Squatty Potty.
Yeah.
And I literally have not been able to poop for 2 days. Like,
Ooh.
I'm sorry, this is such TMI. Like, I hope we've all fostered a level of comfort with each other by now that you all can.
I got no warning, listeners, that this is where the conversation was going to go when I asked my very innocuous question.
Innocent question of how am I?
How you're doing? Well, the answer is constipated as hell.
This is how I'm doing. Well, so I have a resolution to share with everyone, which is that just this morning, just before I hopped on the horn with you, my friend, I did a makeshift Squatty Potty. There happened to be this little recycling bin that I found in the closet of my hotel room, and so I repurposed that for my task, and it worked great. I was able to surpass this challenge, and I'm feeling a lot better now.
I'm just so happy for you. That's really great.
We need to invent a travel Squatty Potty because I think it's needed now that I can't go back, really.
Yeah.
Do you have a Squatty Potty?
I don't.
Well, you need to get one. I'll get you one. Just
we do have
keep
a
an eye out. Big bidet fan myself.
Yeah, this is similarly something you don't want to travel without. We need a travel bidet as well.
Absolutely. It's just so much better and cleaner and like easier. I don't know how I live without that either. Now that I have a septic tank. No, this is just riveting podcasting, but can't put a ton of stuff down that thing. So a bidet is like, saves the environment, saves paper, save a tree, use a bidet. Yeah.
Save a tree and your beehole.
That's right. Yep. How are you?
I think I'm still recovering from the fact that this is where we took the podcast. Just right out the gate. Just like the open road was ahead of us. You yanked the wheel real hard.
Listen, regular daily bowel movements are a cornerstone of health. You know how healthy you are based on the quality of your movements. And so this is really just a PSA for everyone. Take care of that colon health and treat your butt good.
Amen. Thank you for taking us on that journey.
You're welcome.
You playing? What are you playing? What video games are you playing?
Jamie's like, I don't even have capacity to tell you how I am. Let's just move on. That's fine. So, there's been a lot of podcasts with multiple episodes dedicated to Elden Ring, and Jamie and I have been in a world of our own, with a little game that you might not have heard of since it's been completely overshadowed by Elden Ring. But that game is Guerrilla's Horizon Forbidden West, a sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn. And it's a long open world game. And so we sort of introed the discussion the last episode where we were talking a bit about our initial impressions of the game at first getting into it. Now we both have sunk over 50 hours into the game. Myself, I'm at around like mid 50s, maybe even early 60s. I can't remember the last time I looked in terms of hours. And Jamie, you have...
I forgot to pull the number before coming on, but it's certainly over 80 at this point. Last I checked. So, and I fully finished the game story and popped the platinum just last night.
Nice.
So feeling very accomplished and proud of myself.
As you should. They should send people physical medals when you platinum a game. It's like
that might be
a
a bridge too far. They do occasionally send out like special like avatars and stuff if you platinum a game. So that's nice. That's always a nice little gifty. PlayStation will send those out every once in a while for various first party games.
Yeah, so I'm maybe 3/4 through on your estimation based I shared with Jamie where I currently am in the game. And I've definitely I think my experience with the game has definitely deepened, and I've gained more confidence in my gameplay. And I think we just are in a place where we're able to have more of a maybe your more review style. I'll say review style conversation, because what we do is a bit more
far cry from a traditional review. But this is basically, we know that we can't, although we would probably enjoy, we can't just inundate y'all with Horizon Forbidden West for the next several months. So this is kind of going to be our conversation to put a pin in how we feel about the game, whether or not we recommend folks play it, and talking about some kind of the broader themes and mechanics and the gameplay loop and relationships. This will be a spoiler-free conversation today. We're kind of bandying around the idea of potentially doing a spoiler cast, just like a special episode or something when Spencer actually gets through the story. Because we know we're going to want to talk about it. So maybe we'll just turn the mics on and release that for you. But for now, this is kind of our conversation about our overall thoughts and feelings of Horizon Forbidden West and whether or not folks should check it out. So, Spencer, with where you're at in the game, what's standing out to you? How do you feel about Horizon Forbidden West?
So, something like... So there's weapons, of course, that you can collect, armor, and resources throughout the game. And there's also these special tools that you get access to through just proceeding through the story and then having certain new areas unlocked to you. Now that you're asking me this question, I am sort of like I feel like I'm 40 plus hours into the game before unlocking like 4 of the like 7 of these special tools that you get access to. And I was sort of just like even though Horizon is a very open world game, the fact that really much of the map is inaccessible to you until you're 3/4 of the way through the game is sort of like an interesting choice. But it's like all of a sudden at like 40 hours in, you get like 3 tools in somewhat rapid succession that unlock most of the explorable map areas in all of the areas preceding the point that you are at when you get them. All I have to say is that at this point in the game, something that I've been really excited about is getting these tools that allow for new ways of traversal. And one of those things is essentially a machine part forage diving mask that Aloy can wear and be underwater indefinitely. As someone who gets very stressed out by underwater gameplay areas where you have a breath bar that's depleting, and a person who swims at a like stress-inducingly slow and realistic pace, especially when surfacing. I had very, very sweaty palms through a lot of the earlier sequences of the game because there were areas where you maybe need to sneak and avoid being detected while also going through underwater portions where you don't even really know where you are and you're kind of still trying to navigate and find your way out of somewhere. And there's underwater sections. That's like very scary to me. So having this mask and just having that stress taken away, first of all, and also employing this totally new to Horizon, like these vast underwater exploration areas that feel like an entirely new dimension to the game. Like I'm blown away by the just underwater world building and kind of what the areas, what they look like, and the thought and detail put into these beautiful underwater scenes. And also just the almost like, I don't know what, it almost reminds me of like playing Echo the Dolphin on the Sega Genesis, or playing even like Legend of Zelda. I think Ocarina of Time is the one I'm thinking of, where there's like a lot of swimming and underwater levels and kind of puzzle traversal. Like it felt almost like it touched something almost nostalgic in me. I really love the underwater sections of the game. And I'll leave it. I'll pass it over to you if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's so rare. I think the iconic underwater section that I always think back on that I think initiated or at least exposed that fear of there's something creepy about underwater sections in games, like by and large, even if they're not intending to be creepy. I think some of the ones that are iconic that stand out to me, I remember playing Crash Bandicoot Warped, and those underwater levels, especially the areas where the eels would pop out of the holes and grab you, or the sharks were swimming, or the pokey fish, and you kind of had to avoid all of those things as you maneuvered through. Always really like kind of creeped me out, stressed me out as a kid playing them. Then there's kind of the underwater sections in Shadow of the Colossus, and trying to get on the back of a creature that is swimming through the water to try to kill it, and knowing it's going to go down deep, and trying not to drown as you like navigate that whole process and manage your stealth. Like underwater sections tend to be like the best ones. The ones that stick with me are the ones that did kind of creep me out a little bit too. The Assassin's Creed games have long had underwater sections in the games, and I've always kind of found them kind of dull. I don't think they control super well. And I think it's just tough it has been historically tough for game developers to make underwater sections that feel fun to play and are conveying like a fun atmosphere. Like I think the good ones tend to be ones that are a little stressful, and so that's not necessarily fun, but it's engaging. And then the ones that try to make it fun, I've always just been like, yeah, but I just kind of move slow and clunky, and I can't really steer my character.
Yeah.
And I think Horizon Forbidden West has both I still don't know if the underwater sections were like my favorite part of the game, but it's the best underwater gameplay that I've experienced that could it could be fun, it could be magical. There were so many times where you're in an underwater area and you're just like, I was kind of blown away by the beauty of the art and the world that was underneath the surface of the water that I could find by going underwater. I actually just yesterday in my quest to platinum the game encountered a cauldron, which are the big machine factories that are kind of like dungeons almost that you go into, the machine building factories. And I encountered a cauldron that was mostly underwater. And so navigating that mostly underwater, it was beautiful. It was so cool. It was such a fun experience. And I think that it's rare that I find myself saying that about a underwater experience in the game. But I think Aloy controls in a fairly precise way while still feeling like she's actually swimming.
Yes.
And the art is beautiful. And they do put machines in the water with you in certain segments to lend to a feeling of trepidation and stress. But I never felt, because there's no underwater combat, so they don't ask you to actually fight with the machines. You have to just kind of stealth around them. And I think that they did it in a sparse enough way that I was not getting frustrated with it. It wasn't like, oh my God, so now I've got to sit here and wait for this machine to pass me by. Like, it felt appropriately dangerous without feeling like it was slowing me down to the point of frustration. And I just think they struck a really good balance with it. And it's certainly the best that I've seen in recent games trying to provide an underwater section.
Absolutely. Like, I think, as you're like alluding to too, it's like being underwater can be inherently like claustrophobic and just stressful, because as humans, it's unnatural that we are completely submerged and for an indefinite amount of time. And so I think too, there was a little bit of, I felt at times that the music was almost borrowing from Jaws, like when, especially in the scenes where there were machines swimming around, you'd hear like, Dana, 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 like, and I kind of, like, I don't know, it was almost like tongue in cheek a little bit. Like it was, like I never felt too scared. Like like just everything about how combat wasn't really taking place underwater. It was mainly just a new way of experiencing the world. I found it incredibly enjoyable. And something you touched on that really reminded me of something I've been feeling is I too have felt blown away by the detail and just beauty of the underwater sections of the game. And as you're traversing on your journey in this open world, there are lots of bodies of water, like rivers, ocean areas, lakes. And I mean, you could go through the entire game without really going underwater and exploring that deeply, and you can have a fine experience with the game. I think there's something mysterious and almost like romantic about this idea that there's a whole other half of the map that's just laying beneath the surface waiting for you to discover it. And for the players who do, you know, now that you have this tool, go back and explore those areas, there's such payoff and beauty waiting for you. But the game never like forces you to engage with that. And so I just think that's something so cool about this almost complete other world that's within this game, just like waiting to be discovered. It's just like the deep sea in our real life. Like there's like so much more that we don't even know about. And we could live our whole lives never knowing. And I don't know, it's just like a really cool thing in this game that I wasn't really expecting the just how fully realized it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What else is sticking out for you? How are you feeling about the battles? I know we obviously, as I referenced in our Patreon episode this month, we really dove deep on the combat mechanics. So I don't think, I think if you want that really deep dive in how the combat mechanics work and how we're engaging with them, I would say go check that Patreon episode out. But just, generally, you've put a lot more time in since we recorded that episode. How are you feeling now about combat mechanics, weapons, fighting machines, fighting humans, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, thank you. I definitely feel like I'm in a much better place than I was in my first dozen hours with the game. I think I've really learned that elemental combat is super important in this game, as you told me. Like, so you're fighting. There's machine battles, and then there's human battles, and and each machine or human, that you can scan them with this tool that you have that lets you learn more about the environment and around you, and has data that it can give you like a Google glasses basically, or a Bluetooth that can scan things. But it'll tell you like this machine is strong against fire, but it's weak to acid. And so if you have an acid weapon, you're going to want to hit it with that, because once you've hit it with that enough times and expose its weakness, hitting it with other weapons that do damage, it'll like quadruple, like it gets exponentially more hits in, and you can down machines much faster than just trying to blunt force your way through it. So I think like I'm definitely understanding and becoming more successful in the combat at this point. I am finding that I'm still needing to work, sort of readjust difficulty levels and stuff, just because it's just very frenetic combat, and you have to be very precise in hitting weak points. It's just something I struggle with. I will say too that understanding the sort of weapon color coding system really unlocked a lot for me as well. I think there's so many weapons that you can purchase and use in the game, but really to be successful, you have to pay attention to the rarity of the weapon. So the weapons are given different grades. Like if it's uncommon, it's kind of like entry-level weapon, and going all the way up to rare, very rare, legendary status. And so I feel like when I stopped looking at the number, like literally the stats of the weapon, and just look at the rarity and what type of ammo it had, I was much more successful. So I do think there's a sort of user experience design question there of like, I think the Jamie, I don't know the game could have done a better job just sort of contextualizing what you should be paying attention to with the weapons that you buy. And it's not even about like the look of the weapon, or like the lore around, like each weapon will be like this. It was made for this purpose, and it is used by the people who live in this area. And it sort of makes you think like, oh, if I'm in the icy area, I should use the weapon built by the the people who live in the icy, and like it's just like you got to disregard all of that and basically just look at what type of ammo it has and what its rarity level is. And so if I had known that earlier and understood the outsized importance of those things, I think I would have had a better time. I just think there's a little bit of for how important the weapon types and ammo specifically types are to the success in battle. I think there could have been a little bit more structure and framing and helping users more easily understand what to look out for with weaponry. Yeah. But that being said, I have been a lot more successful in the machine battles. And I know you too wanted to touch a bit on the human battles. But before we go into that, was there anything you wanted to add to the machine discussion?
No, I mean, I agree with a lot of your critiques of the way they share information about how the weapons work. I don't think they did it in a manner that was especially clear. I think this game, if it has a super clear fault that it makes, it's that in a lot of areas it provides, well, it's both what makes it, I think, really good and what you can critique about the game, which is that in a lot of ways, Horizon Forbidden West is an expanded and more deep version of Horizon Zero Dawn. In so many ways. There's aspects of the narrative that feel like an expansion of that original narrative. And what I mean is like taking a lot of the same beats and maybe even some similar plot points and then adding to those, making it bigger. The world is bigger, there's more. The skill tree is bigger, there's more. The weapons, it's bigger, there's more upgrades. And so they added a lot of depth. But I think in adding so much, there's areas where they lost clarity or where it can feel like a bit of a retread when we talk about things like the narrative. And so in a lot of ways, like, I think that this is a better game than Horizon Zero Dawn. And I really like this game. But I also think there was a more straightforward simplicity to some of what Zero Dawn did.
Yes.
That this game could do with a little bit more, giving you more ways to kind of cut through the bullshit and making things a little bit clearer. And I think in one area where they kind of mess that up is in all of the stuff that they added to the weapon system.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that you have a more variety of weapons, it's that you have more variety of tiers and more variety of upgrades. And it's too much without explaining to you how any of those things actually affect your combat. So
yes,
I agree with all of that critique. I think it's apt. I think once you get to the point that you do understand how it works, the game really opens up and the machine combat is a ton of fun. It's just as much fun as it was in Zero Dawn. I do think it's made more challenging. And I think some of that has to do with because they're giving you so many different options and they want you to kind of experiment and explore and figure out what works where. And that hit for me and I enjoyed it. But I think they make the learning curve a bit too steep to actually get there and understand how all of that works. And maybe if it's, I don't know if it's tutorialization or just giving you more information in the menus, but just kind of bring that curve down a little bit so that and give people some help early on understanding what matters and how they should, or even telling them that they should be experimenting and trying different things. I don't know. And then when it comes to the human combat, this was a common critique with Zero Dawn was that the human combat was like nowhere near as fun as the machine combat. And they made a lot of changes to the human combat in this game. They've really made melee combat much more robust. And I think the changes that they made to melee combat were good. Like you have a lot more different moves that you can do with your spear. They've added this thing where you can kind of build up power on your spear and then hit someone and attach kind of a power orb to them and then hit that with an arrow and then that'll explode and do a lot of damage. These are fun developments. But at the end of the day, I personally don't like fighting with my spear is not my first choice. I don't think that is given the vast number of different ranged tools that you have at your disposal, the idea that someone would come into this game and be like, I'm going to melee all the way. I don't know. I guess you could want to do that, but I just don't think that that's what the game's primarily designed for. And I don't think that's a fun way to play the game personally. And you're missing out on a ton of variety if you just want to go in there and hack and slash.
Yeah.
And then the human enemies, they tried to make them more difficult, but I feel like all they really did was make them spongier.
Wait, what's that mean?
Like they can just absorb so much damage before they go down.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a little bit of immersion breaking because I just fought a fucking grizzly bear robot and managed to take that thing down with like some skill and precision. And now this like 5.5 foot tall human wearing like just a helmet and no shirt or armor is running at me, and I have to like
taking 10 arrows to the chest.
Taking 10 arrows to the chest before they go down. And I was just like, it just kind of breaks it for me a little bit. And I don't find that I have fun with the human combat. The good news is that by and large, you can avoid human combat in this game. There's a handful of story missions that require it, but for the most part, you can leave it the hell alone. However, for the platinum, I was required to go do, there's rebel outposts all throughout the map that you can go fight, and they're basically just like bases that you can kind of go into, almost Far Cry style, and you have to take down the leader and do a bit of research. And the platinum did require me to do a certain number of those. Not all of them, thank God, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
You just have to do a set number of them. But it was one of the only times that I felt like super frustrated with the game in trying to achieve that platinum, which again was an optional thing that I was forcing myself to do, but it just really made stark for me how much I don't enjoy the human combat in the game. And I'd really be fine with that just never being a thing we had to do again in these games. Like, if the humans are just generally your allies and we don't have to fight humans ever again, I would really be okay with that.
Yeah, that resonates. Like, the human battles definitely, like, it feels like the humans are stronger than the machines, and it doesn't really make sense. Even the, like, I am someone who enjoys taking a ranged approach to outposts like that, like sneaking around, trying to pick off as many people as I can from a long distance with a long shot bow, which is like a strong long distance bow.
Almost like a sniper bow.
Yeah, like a sniper bow. And you get to a point where the one I have, when you upgrade it enough, there's also an added bonus damage multiplier if you are shooting people from a distance of over 30 meters away.
Oh, wow.
So I really, that's kind of my approach. But the way that this game is like, a lot of the people wear these heavy helmets, and so you've got to shoot off the helmet, and then it doesn't even do damage yet, and then you've got to try to headshot them when they're all now moving around and alert. And I honestly feel like the headshot precision is almost like unrealistically precise. Like, you have to shoot them in the temple. If you shoot like on the upper neck or what, it doesn't take, and you're just kind of like, really? Like, if someone was shot in the neck, they would not still be standing right now.
Like, that's basically the same as a headshot. Come on now.
Come on. Like, and it does just kind of feel almost like it's just unnecessarily hard. I don't know.
Yeah, it just feels like the difficulty is inflated just to try to make those battles more interesting or longer. And honestly, I just kind of felt like I should be able to take the vast majority of these people out with relative ease. I feel like I probably died more at the hands of humans than I did machines in the game. Yeah. Which I just think I think that's a problem. I don't know. For the human enemies to be that challenging and also not be fun, because I'm not getting to like pick off certain pieces of the human enemies in the same way that I can with the machines. They're just visually less interesting. Yeah. And anyway, it's something that's like mostly avoidable, so I don't really knock the game too much for it, but I would love to see them try to make some big changes before what I believe there will be a third game in this series based on the way the story plays out. And so I don't know.
I think too, a lot of the human combat can feel like herding cats. It's like you've got to clear out an area, but the humans are so small and they move so fast that often it's like, okay, I've cleaned out most of this area. It's telling me there's one or two more people, and I just keep turning on my focus, scanning wildly around me, trying to find the last like stragglers, and it just kind of it starts to feel tedious and not flowing in the way that machine combat does.
And also kind of incongruous with who Aloy is as a character.
I know.
I just don't like the idea that she's going and like murking these whole bases of people. I don't know. It's again, it's immersion breaking overall for me for a lot of different reasons. Let's talk a bit about the overall gameplay loop, which I don't think we discussed too much. So in our last episode, our last public episode, we kind of broke down the basics of the story. But in terms of the gameplay loop of the game, the way a lot of the missions work, at least for the first 2/3 to 3/4 of the game, is that the game actually gives you a base that you operate out of, which I thought was a really cool addition. And a lot of your companions are available in this space so that you can go up to them and have conversations in between the different missions in the game. I thought that was a really important and appreciated adjustment to the original game. I think both in Zero Dawn and in Forbidden West, you meet a lot of interesting characters. And so I think kind of pulling everyone into one place where you can come back in and periodically check in with them on how things are going and what's going on with them. And there's updated dialogue every time you visit. I thought that was really cool. It reminded me a lot of the Mass Effect series and the way that in between missions, you can kind of go through your ship and everybody has like a set location where you know where to find them. And you just go up to them and talk to them and you can kind of catch up on what's been going on with them. They catch up on what's going on with you. And it really made the companions and the relationships in the game, I think it gave them a lot more weight than they had in Zero Dawn. Still don't think it quite hits the levels of how I feel about characters in Mass Effect. And I would attribute some of that to the fact that by and large, your companions don't go on missions with you. I'd love to see that adjustment get made for the third game. I know it's like basically a trope at this point to like bring like NPC characters along with the main character on a mission. But I just feel like if I had more opportunity to spend more time with the companions, and it wasn't just like me basically going to them for a data dump when I felt like having those conversations, I think that could have really helped those relationships feel more real. And it didn't really make sense to me that Aloy is just always out in the world running around doing things on her own, especially when like a core theme of the game seems to be her learning how to accept help.
Yes.
So I felt like they kind of missed the mark there, but I really appreciated what they were trying to pull from Mass Effect there. And the game even gives you companion quests, which is another thing that kind of pulled straight from Mass Effect 2, where folks who've played that game might know that they have what they call loyalty missions in Mass Effect 2, which is actually that as you build up a relationship with a companion character, you get to a point where you unlock their loyalty quest, which is a dedicated quest line that's just to do with something that's important to them. And in Mass Effect, those are like some of the best missions in the entire game. Horizon tries to ape that, but doesn't quite get there. The side quests that they did with the companions, I thought were good. They were some of the better missions in the game. But again, it just still doesn't quite hit. The other reason I think they don't quite hit, and I'm curious to know what you think about this, is that we don't get to craft Aloy at all, right? Like we're not making dialogue decisions. Even when we're going and talking to the companions, we're just working through a set tree of dialogue. Yeah. And we're not really deciding what we're going to say or how we're going to respond to things. I don't think it's a spoiler to say, like, there's no romance options in this game either. So you're not really getting to decide who Aloy is or how she's relating to these characters. You're just getting to watch it. And I think that key difference between Mass Effect, where you are the player character and you're supposed to infuse yourself into them and be making decisions in the dialogue and stuff when you're talking to characters. I don't know. I think that key decision, like, it creates a little bit of a disconnect. And I don't quite feel, I don't know. I like the companions in this game, but I also don't feel like I'm so invested in them.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think, there is a mechanic where there is a dialogue mechanic where in some situations you can choose, you have three types of emotions that you can respond with. You can give an answer that's logical. You can give an answer that they each have icons. So like the logical answer is like a little brain. The sort of callous strong arm answer shows like someone's arm like flexing, and then there's a heart icon, which is like a more emotional, empathetic response. And it's like, so that's included in the game, but it's in such rare, like there's only maybe a handful of times that it comes up. And so for a game that
And all the choices are kind of the same thing, right? It's like you're like coloring in the language, but like you're not making a decision. Like Aloy's decision is still Aloy's decision, and you're just kind of deciding how you want her to, like, what emotion you want her to bring to a response. Yeah,
exactly. So it could, like, that could be built upon and expanded and allow you to kind of inhabit more or decide more about the type of person Aloy could be. And it's just sort of confusing to me for all of the effort that's put into creating these very detailed, very emotive, very like realized characters. I mean, they all look like
they look
entirely
awesome.
Unique people, and down to the expressiveness of this game, like the micro expressions you see flitting across people's faces, the way the light shines in their eyes, like they feel like real people. So it's just an interesting choice that they went through the effort of creating the most beautiful and fully realized NPCs I've ever seen in any game, and yet keep you at arm's length just through the function of the dialogue and being so locked into and sort of separated from who Aloy is.
Well, it's like Aloy keeps everyone around her at arm's length, and it's like by extension, I feel like the game keeps them at arm's length. And I don't quite know what needs to change to make that feel more like I'm getting to know them as the player and I'm building a deep relationship with them, but Aloy is not. Because like Aloy by default tends to keep everyone at arm's length. And I think that's a core tenet of her character. I think that's part of who she is, because she feels like she has this immense responsibility to save the world. I think she doesn't think that anybody else can really truly help her with that, because she's genetically the person who can do it. Based on her being this clone of Elizabeth Sobek. So she holds everybody at arm's length, but like, I'm still here behind Aloy's eyes, like listening to these conversations. And I think Aloy does like feel a deep affection for these people, even if she's not willing to show it. I think the game alludes that's there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just weird. I don't know what they need to change there to make them feel to make me feel like more invested in them, or because I don't know.
Yeah, I think maybe something that I liked in Tales of Arise is that was a JRPG that came out late last year. I'm like, what is time?
Like last fall.
And in that game, it's like every time you spoke to a companion, so there were these scenes where you could rest at campfires and then you could choose which of your companions you wanted to talk to, and occasionally they'd have new dialogue options. But every time you did that, there would be sort of this invisible like friendship meter that would fill. And after enough conversations, you sort of unlock different cutscenes, and like the game indicates to you, it's like you're growing closer to this person. You've reached max friendship with this person. And it wasn't anything where like it ever led to romance options or anything like that. But I think just even that simple added layer of feedback that like you've grown closer to this person, it just gave me a little bit more. So I just feel like if there was maybe more of those options of which emotion you want to respond with, and just even giving you the feeling of being a little bit more in control, I think that would help. And maybe just I don't know.
No, I think that's spot on. I think the nut of this issue is that it doesn't feel like my decision to engage with the characters on a frequent basis is giving me access to anything different than I would have otherwise.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't feel like the relationship is deepening.
Yeah.
And it should, right?
Right.
It should feel like the relationship is deepening. Or even the companion missions that open up, they open up based on your level and where you're at in the story, not based on how much you've engaged with that character. I think that's the problem that they need to solve for.
Yes.
Because if I'm going and talking to this character every time and I'm making a decision to engage, it shouldn't feel like I'm just getting, it should feel like our relationship is deepening in some real way, and not just that, well, we're at this point in the story, so now this character can tell you ABC, and later in the story, they'll tell you XYZ, but that has nothing to do with how much you've talked to them, and the dialogue options are going to be the same based on where you're at in the story regardless.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah. Well, you nailed it. You're the one that articulated it. I'm agreeing with you.
We nailed it.
All right. We got to push through here. I think there's one more thing that we really want to touch on before we give kind of our final perspectives of the game. And that is, we wanted to talk a bit about Aloy as a character and her, we just kind of talked about how you as the player have relationships with the companions, but specifically talking about Aloy's relationship with her companions and some of the themes that are drawn out through that process. So, how do you feel about Aloy?
So, Aloy has very charged interactions with her companions. And I think it's something that I was like, am I crazy? But I talked to Jamie about it and she was like, no, I've seen that too. And I know that we're not the only ones, but it seems like particularly with her male friends, there's this suffocating, overwhelming weight of tension that overshadows every conversation that is had. And I would say it's particularly with her companions, Avad, Erend, for the beginning of the game, Varl, who's someone who becomes much more of a trusted friend and confidant, which I was happy to see. And even some other men that she just encounters, like I often feel like the game, understandably, you are supposed to feel that Aloy is this like stunningly beautiful warrior who's incredibly strong, and so she appeals to people in this culture both as someone who's incredibly capable and strong at hunting machines, but also doesn't realize how gorgeous she is and that any man would be honored to be with her and are pining over her desperately. And it's something where, because of the level of detail in lovingly creating these characters and making them fully fleshed out and realized, you can honestly feel, especially in cutscenes, the way that these men feel like they can barely contain the strength of their feeling for her. And Aloy is just completely either oblivious or is just completely uninterested in engaging in that
I'd say
part.
Actively put off for the most part in this game.
Scenarios,
I think in Zero Dawn there were instances where it played more as obliviousness, but in this game I think pretty much across the board, if she thinks there's even a whiff of this guy might be into me, she becomes, I think, pretty cold, and that the way that she tends to hold people at a distance, I think, becomes even more exacerbated and dramatic, to the point where I think, particularly with the dynamic with Erend, it in many instances almost feels like she is annoyed with him and frustrated by what I think is so clearly his like deep love for her and attraction to her. And I don't know, they in particular have a very odd dynamic to me, because I think even from the first time that they interact in the game, early in the game, when you first run into Erend, and he's kind of like, he's very upset with Aloy for leaving the party that happens at the end of the first game and not telling him where she was going. I think it's really clear from that very first scene that there's this deep undertone of Erend being in love with her, knowing that she doesn't love him back, and he feeling like he doesn't deserve for him to love him back, and that he's a piece of shit. Like, Erend feels like he is a piece of shit. As somebody who has often felt like I'm a piece of shit, I see it very clearly. But then the way that manifests is he kind of follows Aloy around in this really like sad sack, like lost puppy sort of energy that's very desperate. Like, he brings a lot of desperation to their interactions. And I I don't know, I enjoy the drama of it, but I also just feel like because the game never articulates it clearly, like neither character ever clearly articulates how they feel about the other one. And this is all subtext that I'm just picking up on as someone who has watched these dynamics play out in real life. I just am really curious if Guerrilla is doing this intentionally or not. Like, I'm so confused and curious.
Well, it's like, for a game that made the choice to not include romantic subplots and options, and is very clear that is not an option. I am just dying to understand why they filled every person-to-person interaction with so much emotional weight that as the player, you start to feel uncomfortable watching cutscenes because you feel like these characters are about to explode out with something that they cannot say. And it's just like, okay, why did you take romance options off the table if you were going to psychologically and emotionally torture us for the rest of the game? Like, it almost was like the developers and artists were like, well, we wanted romantic so possibly be available, so we're going to pack as much as we possibly can into these cutscenes so that players can create their own narratives happening off screen. Like, that's how painfully obvious it is.
Yeah.
It's just a wild choice. And I think it's interesting too to contrast that with how Aloy interacts with the women in her life. And I think, Jamie, you were speaking on it a bit earlier. Do you want to kind of say how you interpret sort of how Aloy reacts to her women counterparts in contrast?
Well, I just think, and this, it's not exclusive to women because I think, well, anyway, for the vast majority of the women that Aloy interacts with in the game, she is much more quickly and immediately warm to them. The game shows her in animations like putting her hand on their shoulders, like looking them deeply in the eyes. Like she is much more empathetic to their situation, offering them, like speaking more emotionally with them and offering them emotional advice or tending to their emotions more directly in a way that she really isn't with her male counterpart. Especially, again, I bring up Aaron, and he's obviously like very sad and depressed, and Aloy does not engage with any of that. She speaks to him like much more surface level, talking more about like what they're gonna do next, the plan, and what his role in that will be, rather than being like, hey bud, like I can see you're having a tough time, let's talk about that. She does not offer him any of that kind of emotional support that she gives very freely and willingly, even to women characters that she's just met. So on the one hand, I'm like, well, are they trying to suggest that Aloy is perhaps queer? Like, is she romantically interested in women? But they also, I don't know, none of her interactions with men or women feel like sexually charged to me at all. Like, I don't feel like she's actually attracted to anyone. She just seems to be bonding more closely with the women characters. And then, as you alluded to, Varl, which kind of happens after, I think the game makes a clear decision with Varl's character to very clearly tell us Varl is not interested in Aloy, and Aloy learns that information as well, like not romantically interested in her. And once that information is revealed, Aloy becomes much warmer to Varl. Like her and Varl actually develop one of, I think, the best friendships and relationships in the game. That the game puts on display for us.
There's an instant release of
tension.
Yes.
And so to me, that all kind of suggests that she's aware that a lot of men are interested in her romantically, and she does not want them to be. And until she can like draw that clear line and understand that they're not interested in her romantically, it's hard for her to engage with men. She doesn't seem to have that same issue with women, but I don't know that that's because she's romantically interested in women. And I wonder if to me, it seems like they could be building Aloy up to be an asexual character. But again, they don't articulate any of this stuff, and Aloy doesn't articulate any of this stuff. And it's really hard to know, like, are they just doing this because Aloy is very mission driven and she knows she's on this mission to save the world and she doesn't have time for it? Is that what they're trying to convey? Or are they actually trying to convey that? I would just think, like, if this was a person who just didn't have time for it, there would still be some pining. There would be like some, oh man, I'm really into this person, but fuck, I don't have time. I've got to save the world. And we don't get any of that. And so it's really hard to know which direction they're playing with this. And I really wish they would kind of, I don't know, it just feels like they need to make a decision and actually have that articulated. Rather than having kind of all of these questions and like subtle hints about the way Aloy interacts with people. I think we need to be a little bit more direct at this point. We're 2 games in. We spent the whole first game coming out of it kind of having this similar, like, is Aloy supposed to be asexual, or is she just not? Is everyone just horny for her and she's not into it because she's on a mission? And that continued through this game. And I feel like we need to address this in some way, probably.
Yeah, because if that's just honestly that she's aromantic or asexual and that's just who she is, like, I would love to see a game just fully embrace that and be comfortable with it instead of making it seem like that it's the result of some sort of negative, like, oh, well, she's like this because of her trauma being raised in isolation, or she's like this because she's just too busy and dedicated to the mission. It's like, it's almost like, oh, like this inherent negative insinuation that asexualness or aromanticism is a result of something bad going on, or that there's something wrong with you, or that you're unable to access a certain part of yourself. It's like, no, like, if that's who she is, like, let's celebrate that, and let's, you know, like let's acknowledge that as part of her character. Let's not do this dance where we're torturing all of our non-playable characters and we're all like just wondering how we're supposed to feel about Aloy. Like, it is a strange choice, and I too would love to see some definitive direction on that. Because it'd be really cool if she just, you know, if we have this asexual representation.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it'd be great. I would fully support them making that decision. I also think like they could justify her just holding everyone arm's length because of how she feels it. Like, I think they can make this work in any direction they want to make it work, and I'm okay with it. I think it'd be really cool to see an Ace or Arrow character in a game. That'd be fucking awesome. But even if they didn't take it that direction, I think they can make it work. They just need to articulate it. I think part of the problem is we don't get, as players, nobody gets, but we as players should be getting, I think, some insight at this point into Aloy's interior life. And I don't think either game gives us that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so I think players like you and I who really want that and seek it, we end up picking up on these breadcrumbs basically that the game throws at us, these like tiny little clues that maybe we could piece together to get some sense of Aloy's interior. And I thought the way this game opened, with so many of her friends coming to her and being like, hey, it fucking hurt that you just pieced out and we want to help you. And the fact that the game does build a narrative where at the end, part of what Aloy is saying she has learned is that she needs people to help her. And yet she just says it and it's flat. And there's I don't watch her struggle with that through any point that where she's saying that. And I don't need her to say it to other characters, but my God, she runs through the world talking to herself nonstop. And one of the things she says is just like, oh, I'm really wrestling with the fact that I don't want all my fucking friends to die. And like, I actually care about them a lot, but I'm worried that I'm going to die or they're going to die. So I can't let myself get close to them. And Ross raised me to be like this kind of like emotionally separate, like icebox of a person. So I don't know how to deal with any of this. Also, I'm going to pick up this item. It's going to go in my stash. Like, can't she just fucking say that? Like,
right. Yes, you're right.
Just tell us. Just tell us.
Yes.
I understand why she wouldn't be able to say this and articulate these things to the other NPCs, to her companions. But the developers have to give us as the players some insight to her interior life because we're supposed to be her. We see the world through her eyes. And I still don't feel after 2 whole games that I truly know what's going on in Aloy's head. I can make a lot of guesses based on the little pieces of subtext that I'm picking up, but I still don't feel like I truly know what's going on in Aloy's head. And I think that's a problem for the game at large.
Let us in.
Let us in, Aloy. Let the players at least in.
Yeah. Game 3 is going to be all about trauma, Aloy's cognitive behavioral therapy sessions.
Well, they need it. All the characters in this game need some fucking therapy, man. Like so many of them. Aloy especially, but a lot of people need some real therapy. Man, wow. So, Spencer, what do you think? Should people play this game?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's just for the visual richness, the depth of the world, the absolutely gorgeous masterclass in what NPCs can look and sound and feel like. I think too, for all of the just all of the richness of what's available, the diversity of type of gameplay you want to have. Like there's so much exploration, and then there's like the Far Cry style like tactical invasion. There's big battles. There's collecting relics, and like, so it's like no matter what type of experience you want from an open world game, you can get it with this one. And And yeah, I mean, I think it's also a really exciting sci-fi world. Like, I'm someone who loves speculative fiction and stories about the future, and it continues to be a really cool story and just really cool and unique characters. And so I definitely think it's a great option to play if you're not into Dark Souls.
Yes, I agree 100%. I do think, we're not going into spoilers in this episode, but as the person on the podcast who has fully finished the story, I will say that narratively, the game makes some end game decisions that definitely have me scratching my head a little bit with where the narrative goes. It's not enough to ruin the game for me, for sure. I think this game is, the sum of its parts outweighs the handful of decisions that I sit here and go, really? And I definitely think it's worth playing. I think it's a gorgeous game. I think it's absolutely so impressive what they've achieved. I just think back to something like Skyrim and like where we're at now today in terms of open world and what that can look like. Just the fidelity of the open world. I continue even after 80 plus hours in to find myself just pausing to look at the scenery. And I know graphics are only one aspect of a game, but my God, this game is just such a visual treat.
Yeah.
And that does influence my overall experience of it. I'm just constantly looking around and going, wow. And especially, in the scale and scope of the creatures that you can encounter, the areas that you can discover, the variety of things that you can get into in this game. And on top of that, I think overall, the companions and NPCs and dialogue that the game presents you with and the narrative arc that it presents you with, I think are 95% really solid.
Yeah.
Really good stuff. So yeah, Horizon Zero Dawn was one of my favorite games of all time. I fully expect Forbidden West to end up on this list too. And I'm so, I was telling Spencer earlier, I really hope we get some DLC later this year, like we did with the first game. That'll drive me back in and get me to clear out more of those map markers. I had so much fun with this game. When I wrapped it up last night, I kind of took like a final trip around the world.
Victory lap.
Victory lap. I took a final trip back to my base and had a final conversation with a character that I liked, and just kind of sat and looked out over the mountains for a little bit and just took it all in and was like, man, that was a good fucking game experience.
That's so lovely.
It was really lovely. So go check out Horizon Forbidden West if anything we've said has made you interested in this game. I do imagine we're going to end up doing that spoiler cast because I cannot wait to talk to Spencer about the narrative decisions that they make in this game. So keep an eye out for that if that's something you're interested in later. But we'll probably just drop that as its own thing so that you don't have to engage with it if you don't want to. But I think now it's time to move over to our interview for today. Our guest is streamer, content creator, and community builder Queerlybee. Bee uses cozy simulation games and conversation to facilitate discussion about the community values of identity, equity, and authenticity while striving to create a streaming experience that is accessible to neurodivergent and sensory-sensitive folks. Spencer and I chatted with Bee about their background in education and how that led them to streaming during the pandemic, the ableism that exists in the traditional model for achieving success in online spaces, and their efforts to add a sensory-friendly tag on Twitch and push for greater awareness and visibility for disabled creators on the platform. Bee was a lovely guest and is just a really kind and thoughtful presence. We really enjoyed our time with them, and I'm sure you all will too. So without further ado, here's our interview with Queerlybee.
Hello to our wonderful guest, and thank you so much for joining us in the virtual Pixel Therapy studio. To start, can you share your name and your pronouns?
Hi, my name is Bee, also known on the internet as Queerlybee, and my pronouns are they, them.
And Bee, how do you spend your time?
Oh, how do I spend my time? So many different ways. I feel like, I don't know, but as of recently, lots of time setting up, unpacking. I just moved. Lots of time streaming. I am a streamer. That is pretty much my full-time gig. I do have one other side gig that I do, but lots of time streaming and gaming and editing as is the content creator life. Snuggling with my lovely partner and our cat Donuts.
Oh, Donuts is the best name for a cat.
That's a great name.
He might scream in the middle of the interview, and if he does, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. We want his thoughts. It's all important.
He tends to have a lot to say, especially when his two dads are in separate rooms, which we currently are. He does not care for it, and he does like to scream to let us know that he does not care for it.
I mean, he's got to make his feelings known. When you're that small, you've got to scream, you know?
Truly.
And B, you mentioned streaming, gaming. What is your personal history with gaming?
It's interesting because I am I'm sure I'm not the first person who has told you this, but I am, in terms of gaming, consistently a product of the pandemic. Prior to this period of my life, I lived at home before college, and my parents were both addicts. So as a kid, I didn't really get a lot of opportunities, both financially, but also just because I was very focused on trying to get myself out of that situation. And so I spent a lot of time very headstrong, focused on I was going to do really well in school, and I was going to get into college, and that was going to be my way out, my ticket out the door. And so that didn't leave a lot of space for just joyful things of just like playing a game that has no impactful purpose on the world. I mean, little did I know back then that gaming could have a very impactful purpose on the world. But at the time, I just perceived it as something very fun and very chill to do. And I didn't really have time for fun and chill things in my mind. So once the pandemic hit and we were working from home, and then for a while I wasn't working, I had way more free time, and I kind of found myself in the Twitch sphere, first as a viewer, and then slowly integrated myself way more than I ever would have imagined, also as a creator and making friends and consistently gaming on and off stream. And so that's kind of how I got involved. It wasn't until basically the last 2 years that I would consider myself like a gamer full time.
It's really amazing to hear that gaming and your relationship with it is something that you were able to foster quite recently, like just over the course of the pandemic, that it provided that opportunity. And that, I mean, you jumped right into streaming, something that I think takes a lot of courage and strength. And I'm just curious, what inspired you to take that leap from just starting to kind of renegotiate your relationship with gaming, or sort of rediscover it, or discover it for the first time? What led you to even take that further into streaming itself?
Well, I definitely found myself in smaller communities that, as a community member, I was really enjoying the presence of that streamer and the presence of the people in that space that they had curated. And it was it felt like a really special type of thing that you don't really see in a lot of other spaces. And that I was really thinking heavily about my career path at the time. I was in education. That was kind of where I started. And anyone who really knows anything about the education field during the pandemic, it has been pretty rough, both in terms of, job hunting, in terms of, teachers have never really been paid appropriately or fairly for their work in general. And also the circumstances in which educators were trying to serve students with very minimal resources that accounted for the new reality that we were living in. And so I myself was trying to figure out, there were aspects of education that I loved. That was the community building. It was the supporting of the students. It was, kind of storytelling. And all of a sudden I was introduced to this new space in which I could do all of those things with a lot less red tape, right? And you find in the education realm, I can still have very important conversations about things that I care about. And I could still build and foster community and support people within that community as a content creator, as a streamer, but kind of in my own way and without as many restrictions. So that was kind of what inspired me, as well as people being very kind and encouraging in the communities that I was a part of. And they were like, you should give it a try, I feel like most streamers with a good head on their shoulders whenever someone wants to kind of join in that realm. They're like, yeah, like give it a go, see if you like it. And the reality was I liked it a lot more than I ever expected. And it is now kind of the trajectory that I am on, career path wise, which is wild and something I never would have expected, but yeah, I'm okay with it. We're here now.
Yeah. I mean, as you're saying that, it's just occurring to me. It's like, why would anyone try to use Zoom to teach? Like my teacher friends are just like, it is exhausting. Just trying to perform for sometimes up to 90 minutes straight at a time to just a wall of black screens, like no engagement, no validation or any sort of feedback, like no promise that anyone is even on the other side. And it's like, wow, so like a platform like Twitch, like it just makes sense to me that like someone, I think for you, like having an educator background, I'm starting to see, how you've sort of naturally taken to streaming. And I also feel like, I don't know, more teachers should be on Twitch. Like it just seems like a platform that's just so much more ripe for the kind of interaction that that kind of give and take requires.
I mean, to be fair, when you do first start streaming, it does feel like you're talking to no one, kind of. You do have to have that capacity for a while before you build up that community to like be entertaining, to basically no response, no like kind of feedback. But I think that it is way more conducive on the viewer side to like type chat than it is to ask students to, for years now at this point, be on Zoom all day, every day in their home spaces, which is quite potentially invasive. I mean, I grew up in, like I kind of mentioned before, in a space where had I been asked to be on camera that much, like that potentially could have introduced the problems in my life to people that I wasn't ready for them to have that amount of access to me. Whereas if I went into school as a student, I could really kind of have this one space separate from my family where I got to like kind of escape that situation temporarily for like 7 hours a day. So it's, education's in a rough spot, and it's hard because it's a problem that comes all the way from the top down. It's the teachers are doing their best, the students are doing their best, but nobody in the whole process is being given the support that they need, from the very top to be able to succeed.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's so true. Like, just thinking back to my own childhood, I think having school, having a place where I could, figure out who I was away from the influence or the fear of being heard or seen by my parents, like figuring out my queerness, like figuring out all sorts of things about myself. Like I couldn't even talk at a high volume, like in my house, in my room. And so like just having that space where I could be who I wanted and also, be around others, like you mentioned, in a controlled way, in a way where, you have the power to set boundaries and also just to portray or share as much of yourself as you're comfortable with is so important, and something that I never really considered until now. And with these at-home learning, sort of bringing the camera and the microphone into your space, like that's an excellent point. Thank you for that. And so back to your streaming on Twitch, as you've sort of alluded to, you've built a growing community on these foundations of mindfulness and care, something that I think is just really amazing to see. And what, if you could share a little bit more about your goals as a content creator, like what are they, and who did you make your channel for?
It's interesting because it all wraps up together really well, right? Like it is in part a space for people to explore who they are and to be able to be in community with people who are similar to them. So probably most of my community is similar to me. So there's a lot of queer folks. We have a lot of disabled folks, a lot of neurodivergent folks, generally a lot of like marginalized communities, because those are the conversations that we're having. We're looking at representation in the games that we're we're playing. We're telling queer narratives in the ways that we're playing the games. I say all academic and formally as if it's not just like us basically shrimping over pixelated characters, but but you know, it is all in all, it is a bunch of people kind of coming together who enjoy similar games, who have similar values of equity and social justice and mindfulness and self-care. I mean, we have a command that comes through chat that I set up on a timer that just reminds folks that like they really are welcome to come as they are in the space today as someone whose spoons, or if you don't know spoon theory, energy really fluctuates a lot. I want the people in my space to know that like if one day you have the energy to come in and be the chatter of the day, you're really like talking to everyone, you're hyped, you're excited, and then the next day something happens and for whatever reason you have no chatting spoons, but you still want to be in company and just watch, that you are more than welcome to just lurk and not say anything and just coexist in that space with us. So that's the purpose of the space. In terms of goals, I guess it's so hard because I just generally want to continue on the same trajectory and continue. I think something that I would say I'm proud of myself is always kind of keeping a relatively level head in an industry that is rooted in a lot of competition. It's rooted in, it's not always kind to marginalized folks. And so I think I just like to kind of keep my goals pretty balanced and just sort of like keep on the same trajectory that I'm on, keep welcoming more people, and making sure that I'm doing a lot of self-reflecting along the way. I think that that has helped me a lot in terms of pausing and taking opportunities to be like, okay, what's working, what's not working, how can we make this space even more comfortable, even more inclusive of people, and learning and continuing to grow and continuing to have my space grow with me as I grow as a person. And as long as I feel like I stay on that track, then I feel pretty good about where we're at with things.
Absolutely. And you know, you mentioned when we first started talking about how, like in the beginning, streaming can feel like a lot of talking into the void and sort of not getting a lot of feedback now, of getting feedback back. But now, you know, you've built a thriving and growing community. I was wondering, like, when you look back, what do you think the turning point or turning points were for you that started causing the community to grow at a faster rate?
Oh, that's always so hard to know exactly of all the different pieces of work you put in, what actually led people to make it there. You never really get to know that precisely, but I think it's just probably authentic relationship building. I mean, a lot of the base of my community came from genuinely interacting in other folks' communities, and then maybe that streamer would consider rating me. Not that was the purpose. That's really important. I definitely find there are people who do it with like ingenuine goals in mind, and no one ever owes you anything, and it is, but in terms of developing genuine friendships and then supporting each other, that definitely helps, as well as making connections within those communities as well, beyond just the streamer. And so I think that that was really where it started, was with community building and connections with others. And then that sort of flourished really positively for me as a creator in my space, because they saw how I was interacting elsewhere and they were like, maybe I'll go check out what Bee's doing in their own space. Seems like it might be pretty cool. And then that's where we found ourselves. Kind of to start off. And then later I grew as a creator and learned more about how to actually, like, a more strategic plan other than just making friends, right? Because at first that's all you know, I didn't go into streaming with the intention of making streaming a career, right? So my strategies in the beginning were somewhat different than what they are now. And now it involves, like, you know, making content on other platforms, and sharing what we do in our space more elsewhere to try to draw people in, to engage with us and get to know us. But I still try to make friends with people. That's just kind of who I am as a person. Very much community oriented, very much still enjoy Twitch. Even if I stopped streaming tomorrow, I think I'd still very much enjoy those spaces. So
Absolutely.
it does go back to the beginning, but we've grown from there and learned more about how to strategize a little more effectively since then.
So, would you consider yourself to be a gamer? Is that a label that you use?
It's so funny because I would definitely use the phrase like outside of the setting, but then when I saw that was a question, I was puzzled for a second. I was like, is that a label I really want to take on? Like officially, when someone asks me that, I don't know. I think so. I mean, I spend enough of my time and I am passionate enough about gaming that I think I would consider myself a gamer, but I don't think it would be my primary purpose, even though that's kind of the sphere that I work in. Community organizing is definitely like, it's up there for me in place of games, and games are more like what we use as a nice like community visual as we're chatting and something for us to engage with together. It's more of a tool than it is necessarily like the main goal. Like I definitely think there are content creators and streamers on Twitch whose main goal is focused in the gaming realm, and more power to you. But for me, it's more like the people in chat. I would die in a boss battle or, get distracted from cutscenes 10 times over to have a good conversation with the people who are choosing to give me their time and energy on a day and hang out with us. And I do it over and over again, and I would do it again, even if that makes me like, quote unquote, like a bad gamer officially, so to speak. Then
no such thing.
So be it. Then so be it, So yes, and it's not my number one priority.
Yeah, no, I love that mindset of games as tools for community building and vehicles for having conversations or sharing experiences or thinking internally using the experience of the game that you're taking in to kind of think about stuff that maybe it's sometimes hard to articulate or not always, there isn't always space in normal situations to kind of have these convos. And speaking more a little bit about the games that you do play, so to name a few: Animal Crossing, Stardew Valley, Genshin Impact. I read in your bio that you like to use cozy simulation games to facilitate discussions around community values of identity, equity, and authenticity. I'd love it if you could share an example of what that looks like in your stream.
The first game that comes to mind is The Sims. It is the only game I played as a kid before I kind of found myself as fully immersing myself into the gaming realm. Very much like didn't understand back then that kind of brought me into the gaming world. I just thought The Sims was The Sims. I don't know why I kind of separated it, but
yeah,
like it's its own little thing that is indescribable. Because I feel like a lot of the people who play The Sims don't necessarily play other games. And so it can be that someone plays just The Sims. And that's what I did for a long time. And The Sims is such an invaluable resource in terms of it is a great game to have conversations about those types of things. So for instance, right now we are doing what is called a legacy challenge in The Sims with my community, and it is where you try to go through 10 generations of a singular family, and within there's like some set goals for each generation that you want to achieve. And the one that we're doing is called the Whimsy Stories, and it's supposed to be a kind of storytelling based one, and we like to incorporate like a lot of queer elements. So one of the generation 2 says that your sim basically never gets involved in a romantic relationship. And it gives its like kind of whole own reason and says you finally like fall in love when you're in your elder years. And I was like, you know what? No, this story is ripe for an opportunity to have a ace arrow character, an aromantic asexual character who is actively choosing not to partake in romance. And I think as an ace person myself, it was like, I read that in the story pretty much immediately. Like that was just the queer reading that I had of it. And I was excited to share that because I would imagine that, and no offense to them, but a lot of like straight content creators who play The Sims are not having those conversations or showing those things. And I want, other queer folks who come into my space to really feel seen and heard and validated by what we're kind of doing in game, as well as the conversations we're having outside of game. So that's just like one example. It applies to pretty much whatever game we're playing, that we would have those kinds of conversations and try to incorporate those types of things into the storyline. But that's a more recent example that came to mind.
No, that's a beautiful example. It's so funny. Like, I so relate to like The Sims was also my first game. It was like 2000. It was like The Sims 1. I still remember the CD-ROM case that it came in, and I was like, there's The Sims and then there's video games. Like The Sims is just the thing I do on the computer, and then video games are like Mario Kart and Super Smash Brothers Melee, or like fighting games you see at the arcade. Like those are video games. The Sims is my little world where I go to figure stuff out and like be me. I just love that you said that.
It was the reason that it continues to be a great game for me to have those conversations is because as a kid, in the same way that I wasn't really able to explore games, I really wasn't also in those set of circumstances that I was in as a kid, with my parents being addicts and, us not having a lot of money. And I also wasn't really able to figure myself out much as a kid until I got into college and got some distance from that space. But The Sims was one secret little getaway for so many of us to explore queer relationships, to explore, different gender presentation opportunities for ourselves and stuff. There's always the little like kind of meme, like a parent comes in, you kind of slide the laptop down because you're playing like two queer characters.
About to woohoo with my boyfriend. Yeah.
And you're like, I don't want my mom to ask questions about why because I don't have the answers for you yet. I just know I'm having fun. So it holds a special place in my heart, and I think in the community's heart. And it was kind of the kick-starting point into me having the confidence to stream in a game that I was really comfortable with, and then slowly navigating into like really getting confident and comfortable and exploring other games as well. So,
Awesome. And something else that's really cool about your content creation is that you share that you focus on content that's sensory friendly and accessible to neurodivergent folks who like to body double and or engage in parallel play. I was wondering, for folks who may not be familiar, if you could say a little bit more about what is body doubling and parallel play?
Yeah, so body doubling, typically something more known in the neurodivergent communities, is when two people will kind of get together. It can be more than two people, but generally double. It's like two people get together and they're doing their own thing, but together. And so this was how I, frequently connected with friends growing up. I didn't know at the time that I was neurodivergent, but this was just, my brain was already doing neurodivergent things. And so we would similarly parallel plays, like two people engaging in some form of play separate but together, right? So it was frequent that I would be like playing The Sims and my friend would be doing art, and we would consider that hanging out together even though we weren't doing anything together. And it gave us that company while also kind of giving us the space to kind of do our own thing at the same time. And as soon as I started getting involved on Twitch, that's exactly mentally how I think about it, right? So like growing up, there would be a lot of times where me and my friends would play The Sims, but separate, because it was never a co-op game, right? But we would be right beside each other, and we'd be kind of like sharing, like, this is what I'm doing in my game. Like, what are you doing in your game? Oh, cool. And then we go back to playing on our own. And so when I'm streaming, frequently I have folks say to me like, oh, like I'm just like playing Genshin alongside you. And that's how I used to engage in Twitch before I was a streamer as well. As like, if you have like a double monitor or a computer and a laptop or a phone and a laptop, you may have like streamer playing the game with you so you don't feel alone, but you're also kind of playing the game on your own, like actually physically in your space by yourself. And so I felt like as I grew as a streamer and as I was figuring out what I was really trying to do, that I wanted my space to be conducive for people to feel like not a pressure to perform in a certain kind of social way while they were with us, and that they could simply come and coexist and vibe in the space or play their own game as they watched. Because, you know, I'm in like this niche little bubble of mostly like marginalized creators, mostly smaller communities. And we see that value, and I see that missing value in like the larger streaming platform. Whereas like I can't watch a lot of streams as a neurodivergent person where there's like this person is like screaming into their microphone and there's like loud alerts going and there's like bright lights in the background and there's just like sensory input wise, way too much going on for me. And I was like, if I'm that way, I'm sure there's a lot of other people who also feel that way, who feel a little overwhelmed when they try to watch streams like that. And that's a stream for someone. Like, no hate towards those people, but I felt like there was like an opening for streams where you didn't talk 24/7 during the entire stream, that it was okay to have those natural pauses where just some like nice soft lo-fi music was playing, where the alerts were calmer, where the vibes were just much more chill. And so that's what I really leaned into. And then I also saw that other creators were also looking to kind of explore that avenue of content creation. It was much more accessible to those of us who didn't have a bunch of high energy, loud, pep like vibes to give off all of the time. And then from there, I really like wanted to advocate for it to have more of a presence. And I put a user voice out on Twitch, and they actually approved the sensory friendly tag. And so now folks who have that goal alongside me can also label their streams as sensory friendly, and neurodivergent folks who need a sensory friendly space have an easy way to search out those spaces that are attempting to create, more accessible space. Now, granted, the thing is hard that like everyone has different accessibility needs, right? So you can't make your space necessarily sensory friendly and perfect for everyone. But the effort being there, I think, means so much to so many in general, even if it isn't perfect. And also that the door is open for them to communicate, right? Like if one of my community members was like, hey, just letting you know, like, I don't know, the thunderstorm flashes in this particular game are really kind of messing with me. I, as a creator, can then I've opened that door for them to have the comfortability to share that with me. And I can look into what are the game settings, or can I switch to my just chatting screen during the, see what options are there to make that game more accessible, or decide maybe that's not a game for our community. Maybe that's a game that I play off stream. So I think just the importance isn't always in perfecting it so much as putting the care into it and the willingness to learn and listen and see if you can make your space more accessible to more people.
So, as someone who is neurodivergent yourself, who is marginalized as a creator yourself, and managing a growing community and being a content creator, what self-care tactics do you use to make this work sustainable for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not gonna lie and say it's easy. It's definitely not. And I definitely, have had to grow a lot personally over time, because so here's the thing people may not really necessarily understand if they're not super involved in this realm, is that as a content creator you rely a lot on algorithms. Whether you want to or not, you don't really have a choice. Like, that is the system in which these platforms are run on. And as algorithms go, they want more people to post more often because that works for them. They make more money, is usually the reason. And as disabled creators, we don't have the same amount of energy that the average able person does. To be able to put out content on multiple platforms like that. We don't have the same number of working hours in a day that the average able person does. So it kind of constantly feels like you're like, you know, running on a moving platform sort of thing. Like, it does feel quite exhausting sometimes and requires a lot of rejecting the norms of what is considered the way to be successful and have a community. There is a lot of ableism involved in the tips and tricks on how to succeed on Twitch, or how to succeed as a content creator beyond Twitch. It's things like you need to be consistent, and consistency looks like streaming 4 to 5 times a week at the same time. And it's like, okay, but for most disabled creators, our bodies are not going to allow for us to be able to have that same kind of consistency. So when I think about it, I had conversations with other disabled creators, us rethinking and reframing what consistency can look like as a consistent energy, right? If so-and-so comes back to my stream, even though I may not be able to stream 4 to 5 times a week at the exact same time, such as another creator might be able to, they know that each time they come, they get the same consistent energy. They feel welcome, they feel included, they know what to expect in that space, and they feel safe. And that is just as valuable of a definition of consistency as potentially being able to stream at the exact same time this X number of days. And you know, if you are able to stream that much, maybe you can't post on other social media platforms. You know, people will give you the tips to post on TikTok, post on Twitter, post on YouTube, post on Instagram. At some point, as a disabled creator, or even if you're not disabled, but you're in a set of circumstances, maybe a parent, maybe, you know, there's lots of reasons, a student, that someone may not have like full-time effort that they can give towards this. Picking and choosing the platforms that work for you and your brain and make sense for you, and not getting caught up in the should, would, could, have of this is the way you must do this. Because the reality of content creation, like any artistic field, any independent field, is there is no one way to be successful. That's simply not true. There may be ways that worked for X, Y, and Z person, but they may not work for you. And that doesn't mean that the way that you want to approach it isn't going to work or isn't a good strategy as well. And so I guess part of my self-care is debunking some of that and not feeling less than as a creator just because I go about things in a slightly different way. And then also turning around and trying to forge community amongst other marginalized creators where we can all kind of remind each other of that. Because when you're getting this barrage of messages that are the same over and over and over again, it becomes very difficult to rewire your brain into remembering that there are 1,000,001 ways you could approach this process and that your way is okay. So that's like big thinking wise. You know, small thinking wise, it's things like being self-aware of when I feel like I'm feeling a little burnt out, taking a break, recognizing regardless of the effect that that might have on my analytics, that my health and my longevity and sustainability in this whole process is more important than, you know, this small week's numbers, right? It allows me to continue to be a creator for years to come if I take the breaks that I need to take. And any normal, healthy human in any normal job takes breaks. So it's
Oh, yeah.
okay, you know? And those breaks look like a lot of focusing on trying to get away from the PC, because I do so much of my work in this one spot. And so it's like, you know, going out into Chicago, going to a cafe, getting some coffee with my partner. Maybe we'll do some board games, color, like anything we can do to kind of, you know, take space and distance. So like to say touch grass, right? Because it's so easy when your entire world is online to get really caught up in the things that when you take one moment to take a step back, you realize are so not important in the grand scheme of things. Not saying online spaces aren't important and the work we do isn't important, but some of the little things that get us caught up in our head and get our mental kind of haywire, those things often not as important as they feel in that high intensity moment.
Yeah, like in a field like streaming, which is so rife with analytics and numbers, like I can absolutely see how it can be difficult to sort of retain that humanity or not constantly get pulled into this state of self-comparison or falling into this capitalist trap of like, in order to stay relevant, I need to keep producing. So I think it's great to, you know, just try to foster that sense of balance. And of course, center your health and your sustainability as most important. I think it's a great thing to be modeling for other content creators too.
I think it would be very hypocritical for me to encourage my community, right? Like we have conversations about wellness, about taking care of yourself, about how I'll have some folks pop in and they'll be like, you know what? Like I just like can't really stay today. I've got a lot going on. I don't feel that well, but I wanted to say hi. That's amazing. Thank you for saying hi. Now go away. If you need that space, right? And if that is what I would tell them, then I have to take my own advice. Otherwise, it comes across as very flat, as very not like genuine when I'm encouraging them to take care of themselves. It's like, okay, B, but like you don't really do that either. Right. And so I think that in a world where there are so many creators, what people really are drawn to is someone who is authentic to themselves, and being authentic to yourself involves a lot of breaking down of what this quote unquote expectations for success as a content creator are. It's a very weird kind of oxymoron type of situation, right? Because what you're encouraged to do, I think is like kind of the opposite of what people actually want to see.
Absolutely. And so B, earlier you mentioned using Twitch's user voice, which is, for folks who may not be familiar, it's a section of the site, and also feel free to correct me if I'm missing anything here, where community members can offer ideas for new features or capabilities that they want Twitch to have, and other users can vote and leave comments, kind of like upvoting on Reddit, to get to a point where there's more visibility, and the most, visible ones are actually seen by people at Twitch, and they can then implement these changes. That's how the method you went to for the sensory-friendly tag that you created. And you also used user voice a couple months ago to highlight the fact that, Twitch regularly runs sort of like front page banners on these featured campaigns to highlight marginalized communities within streaming. For example, Pride Month, Black History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, Women's History Month, etc., among many other culturally focused campaigns. And B, you used Twitch's user voice feature to start a grassroots campaign to advocate for a Disability Pride Month. And you wrote, I've never seen one of these happen for disabled creators, which I believe is a big missed opportunity. So you mentioned, your penchant for community organizing, and that being really a passion and at the heart of your content creation. And like for folks who want to learn more about or understand more about what disabled gamers go through, like what would it mean to you to have a dedicated Disability Pride Month?
I mean, I spoke a little bit earlier about the way that algorithms work against the way that our bodies and minds are programmed or the way that we are able to engage in the world. And I think that that puts disabled creators at a very big disadvantage, and just in terms of visibility. I think, it's common even outside of gaming, outside of Twitch, that in conversations about marginalization, about equity, about social justice, disability is frequently forgotten. And it is a telltale sign that Twitch has this entire program where they highlight content creators of all different marginalized communities for years now. And they've never highlighted, from what I know about, specifically disabled creators for a month like that. I think Twitch has uplifted particular disabled creators along the way. And I love to see it, and it makes me very excited to see. But I'd like to see them match that energy with the same energy that they have for any other marginalized group. Just because, similar to how the purpose of all of those other Pride months is that, those folks also struggle with, visibility. The reason that, I got to be on the front page for Pride Month was because, as queer creators, a lot of times we struggle for visibility as creators, and disabled folks are going through the same exact thing, but not seeing that kind of support, structurally, not necessarily always seeing that kind of support from our peers. We see a lot of ableism rampant even in pretty socially aware communities. And it can be exhausting. It can really feel disheartening along the way. And we really support each other, right, as a community. But something bigger, I think, could mean a lot to so many people, both creators who are disabled, but also viewers who don't see themselves in games, don't see themselves in content creation spheres, etc. So I think all of my rambles to say, I think it would have a very big impact. I don't think it would be the end all be all, right? I've seen, obviously, that it's not the end all be all for other communities. It wasn't for me as a queer creator. Going on the front page one time did not all of a sudden make or break my career, right? But it is a gesture, right? It is a thoughtful gesture. We see you, we hear you, we understand that you face a lot of challenges on your path to being successful that others don't face. And here is a gesture of kindness and visibility that we can offer. And it would mean more than I think people necessarily realize. So I hope they see it and they hear it. I believe they've probably already seen it. I mean, if my user voice that got way less votes on the tag was seen, then I imagine my user voice that has over 1K votes on the Disability Pride Month has also been seen. But the follow-up on it is, I don't know, we'll see. As someone who participated in all of the advocacy work that was happening surrounding Twitch earlier this year, we know that Twitch is slow to respond to concerns from marginalized creators, unfortunately, as are most social media platforms, as are most social systems. So I try to be hopeful, but maybe not too hopeful at the same time, and continue working hard on fostering community outside of anything Twitch will offer us. And if they are willing, then it'll be like the cherry on top.
Absolutely. Bea, it's been amazing to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. How can folks keep up with your work, follow you, be in the Beaverse?
In the Beavers, in the hive. Yes. If you'd like to follow me, if you'd like to get connected to our community, we would more than welcome you. I'm mostly on Twitch at Queerlybee, and I'm also on Twitter and YouTube. Those are the platforms I personally create content on. So if you'd like to connect, then those are the best places to find me.
Wonderful. Queerlybee, thank you so much for joining us on Pixel Therapy.
Time is up for today's session of Pixel Therapy. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope that listening to our thoughts and feelings gave you some thoughts and feelings of your own. If you want more Pixel Therapy, come check us out at patreon.com/pixeltherapypod. where you can snag that monthly bonus episode for just $2 a month, plus opportunities to get involved with the community and influence the show directly. If you're not up for contributing monetarily, but you enjoyed this episode, you can show your support for free by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts and following us on Twitter and Instagram at Pixel Therapy Pod. That stuff is just as important, and we appreciate it just as much. Remember that Pixel Therapy is a happy member of the But Why Though Podcast Network, so you can support us by supporting them and heading over to butwhythoughpodcast.com. That's though with a THO. Take a peek at the inclusive geek community they're building around pop culture news, reviews, and kick-ass podcasts like yours truly. And you can keep up with all of this stuff and more by visiting our website at pixeltherapypod.com.
Finally, since we like to put our money and our energy where our mouth is, we end every episode with a recommended side quest. This week, I'm excited to talk to you about the Trans Women of Color Collective. It was created to cultivate economic opportunities and affirming spaces for trans people of color and their families to foster kinship, build community, engage in healing, and restorative justice through arts, culture, media, advocacy, and activism. TWOCC is showing the world that there is a place where trans folks belong, that our community members have a home, and that we are loved, and that our lives have tremendous purpose. To learn more about this awesome organization and to donate, visit www.twocc.us.
Thank you for that side quest, Spencer. That is our show for today. So go forth, run a story mission, level up some stats, and don't forget to hug an NPC every now and then. We'll be back soon with some more
Pixel Therapy.
Bye-bye.